Good evening. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. We at the Bush School are so honored and privileged to be able to host tonight's talk with former French President François Hollande. Before I introduce our speakers and tell you a little bit about our order, I want to take a moment to say thank you to all the people who've contributed in ways big and small to make tonight possible. Our contributors are listed on the back of the program, and I just want to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Without them and their support, we absolutely could not bring events like this. So thank you, everybody who made it possible. I'd like to invite Professor Richard Golson to the stage to introduce President Hollande. Richard Golson is for those of you who don't know him, he's a university distinguished professor, a distinguished professor of French, a senior Scowcroft fellow, and director of the French Institute at Texas A&M University. As if that's not enough, his most recent book on French history is entitled Justice in Lyon, Klaus Barbie and France's First Trial for Crimes Against Humanity. Following President Hollande's lecture, he will be joined on the stage by Dr. David Burse, who is professor and head of the Department of International Affairs and holder of the Brent Scowcroft Chair in International Policy, for a brief question and answer session. You're going to want to stay seated at the end of that because we have a special awards presentation at the end as well. With that, Dr. Golson.
Good evening. On behalf of the Texas A&M University system, Texas A&M University, the Bush School of Government Service, the Scowcroft Institute, and the French Institute of Texas A&M University, it is my distinct pleasure and great honor to welcome President François Hollande to our university and community. President Hollande served as President of France from 2012 to 2017. He was born in the city of Rouen in Normandy in 1954 and educated at France's elite École Nationale d'Administration. Before being elected president in 2012, François Hollande served in a number of distinguished government positions. In 1988, he was elected to the National Assembly to represent the Corrèze department and later served as the mayor of the city of Tulle in that department. He was also special financial advisor in the administration of former President François Mitterrand before becoming Secretary General of the French Socialist Party. After his election to the presidency in 2012, President Hollande worked closely with German Chancellor Angela Merkel on European economic reform. A strong internationalist, President Hollande was a leading voice in shaping the West's response to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's use of chemical weapons against his own people. A staunch opponent of Islamic extremism, President Hollande dispatched French troops to Mali to confront that threat in sub-Saharan Africa. When Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, President Hollande proposed an international arms embargo on Russia. As his recent book, Bouleversement, or Upheavals, confirms, President Hollande has been and remains an outspoken critic of Russian expansionism under Vladimir Putin. In 2015 and 2016, France experienced 3 of the worst terrorist attacks in modern history, all carried out by Islamic extremists. In January 2015, 2 terrorists murdered the staff of the satirical newspaper Charlie Hebdo, and an accomplice slaughtered Jewish clients at a kosher grocery store on the outskirts of Paris. Then, on 13 November 2015, 3 teams of ISIS terrorists murdered 130 people and wounded dozens more at the French National Soccer Stadium, the Bataclan Music Hall, and in cafes and restaurants in Paris's 10th and 11th arrondissement. Finally, in 2016, a Tunisian immigrant affiliated with ISIS drove a 19-ton truck down the beachfront esplanade in the Mediterranean city of Nice, killing almost 90 men, women, and children as they celebrated the 14th of July national holiday. During these horrific attacks, President Hollande was widely praised for his calm and courageous leadership in leading the nation through the worst security crisis it has faced in the new millennium. Since stepping down as president, François Hollande has remained a prolific author and speaker and a wise and widely solicited voice on European and international affairs, most recently on the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. In France, he is a strong advocate for a presidential system more closely modeled on the American Constitution, and has written eloquently on the French left and the future role it might play in French government. A champion of young people, President Hollande is active in encouraging French youth to become more involved in politics and in explaining to them how they can be most effective in their participation. Finally, President Hollande serves as president of the foundation France Commits, which supports young entrepreneurs working for the improvement of the environment and for French society as a whole. The title of President Hollande's presentation tonight is Upheavals, the New World Disorder, Democracy's Struggle with Terrorism. I want to let you know there's been a small change in plan. President Hollande will deliver his speech in English, and then afterwards he will respond to the questions that will be posed in English and French. So your headphones will be helpful to you at that point. So please join me in welcoming President Hollande.
Good evening, dear distinguished professor, dear students. It's a pleasure, an honor for me to be invited in this university, to be in Bush School, to visit the library, and thank you for the organization. We'll speak about the international situation and what democracy now represents for at stake for the nations. Over the past decade, the world has been facing a succession of crises. Initially, there was a terrorist crisis which significantly impacted France, European, and even in United States, namely with the 9/11 attacks. The crisis arose from the instability in the Middle East, an aggressive form of Islamist. Secondly, the health COVID crisis, which emerged 4 years ago, fundamentally reshaped our lifestyles and social interactions and demonstrated our vulnerability. Thirdly, we are currently witnessing conflicts such as the war in Ukraine and the ongoing situation in Israel-Palestine, with the risk of escalation in the region due to Iran's decision to strike Israel and the potential response from the Israeli state. However, it's important not to overlook crises in other regions, including Sahel, West Africa, Sudan, and the Republic Democratic of Congo. Additionally, we are confronted with global challenges such as climate change, technological revolutions, including the current achievements in artificial intelligence and previous transformations brought about by Internet. The addition of all these crises, has profoundly unsettled our democracies, and the threat is very serious. 10 years ago, Russia and China formed an alliance aimed at disrupting the international order to gain advantages in this changing landscape. The bond between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin is particularly strong and has remained unaffected despite global upheavals such as the war in Ukraine. Why is this link a focal point? China is aspiring to become the leading economic and technological power by 2050, while Russia is seeking to regain its status as a dominant empire. Their goals may differ. China focuses on technology, while Russia emphasizes military and territorial expansion. But they share the common objective of promoting a new form of nationalism and undermining democracy and the Western way of life. Both powers despise our customs and freedoms, challenging our political values, our democracy, and condemning European neocolonialism or American imperialism. They use a range of different strategies. They employ direct methods, primarily through force by Russia, and indirect approaches such as financing extremist party, leveraging social media platforms, engaging in manipulation, as in Ukraine, or for China, putting pressure on their neighbors, particularly Taiwan, but also in the China Sea. Russia fosters connection with far-right groups in Europe, governments too, in Hungary, Slovakia, while China developed platforms such as TikTok to collect our personal data. Russia explores other avenues. It disseminates propaganda and orchestrates cyber attacks aimed at critical energy infrastructures, major events, for example, the Olympic Games. We think that for the Olympic Games in Paris, it's probable that Russia is trying to put cyber attacks on the organization. We focus this temptation, but it's sure we are already attacked, and they want to disorganize, to put a disorder for the Olympic Games, because Russian participants are not allowed to go to Olympic Games. We should be frightened by the new division of the world between democracies on one side and authoritarian regimes on the other, reminiscent of the split during the Cold War. However, I believe it is not wise to anticipate the future this way. We must strive to avoid such consideration and preserve multilateralism. What is at stake is our relationship with the South, with India, Brazil, South Africa, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and others. If the South is reluctant to align with our position, we must adapt to their needs and seek their active participation in shaping the future of the world. Uppermost, we must avoid becoming isolated from the South, because Russia and China try to keep the South on their side. Islamism continues to damage our security, albeit with notable change in recent times. As you say, I have been president at a moment where terrorist attacks were very high level by Daesh. Now, Daesh, Islamic State, has been significantly weakened. It no longer holds control over any parts of Syria or Iraq, as it did previously. However, Islamic extremist groups persist in organizing attacks, as seen recently in Moscow. Afghanistan and various parts of Europe facilitated by potential complicity within each respective country. The ongoing crisis in Palestine further serves as a catalyst for inciting individuals to carry out terrorist actions. Additionally, some countries, particularly Afghanistan, serve as bases for Al-Qaeda to manage external operations. In Africa, especially in West Africa, but also other regions, Somalia or Mozambique, terrorist groups have emerged and can jeopardize not only African cities, but also potentially European interests. Hence, the terrorism threat persists and compounds the numerous other challenges we face. Terrorism is not merely a tool wielded by states. Indeed, Moscow was not attacked by Ukrainians, as Putin pretends. That's stupid. That's false. We need concern international effort to address this issue of terrorism. The coordination is very important. It exists between democracies, but has been weakened by the ongoing situation in Ukraine, in Middle East. Indeed, in Asia, international action against terrorism is not the first priority nowadays. That's new. Before, when I was president, action against international terrorism was high in the priority. Not now. We must react against this slackening. The Iranian attack this weekend demonstrates that terrorism through proxies can easily escalate to wars between countries. Iran attempts to hide external aggressions behind terrorist organizations such as Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis in Yemen, finally succumb to reality. The Iranian state is compelled to directly attack its enemies. Indeed, the lack of retaliation for Israel, repeated killings of senior Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders and island military fighters in Syria, in Lebanon of the past few months has unnerved the regime's Praetorian Guard. Therefore, from terrorists through proxies, we are now transitioning to state terrorism. It's possible that Iran become a state terrorism. I think Iran is reluctant to do that. Iran was in revenge between of the action of Israel in Syria. But I think that Iran does not want to go further. But if Israel response is high level, it's possible that Iran continue to attack Israel. This potential return to a classic state-to-state confrontation is not exclusive to the continuation or return of local organization terrorism. However, it strengthens the possibility of a conventional war between heavily armed states. For the first time since 1991, Israel was attacked by another state. It was Iraq the last time. I was in the Bush library, and at this period, Iraq, when Iraq was attacked by coalition, Iraq struck Israel. That's the last time. Now it's a new step with Iran against Israel. Moreover, the war between Ukraine and Russia has lasted for 2 years and can continue a very long time if neither party is able to win. That we can understand the strategy of Putin is to wait for the presidential election in your country. That is a strategy. What will happen in November determines what it can do for Putin, for he can do in Ukraine. In this context, what can the West, especially European countries, do? Firstly, we must maintain the North Atlantic Alliance as it's crucial for the defense of our continents, for the role and for the image of the United States. Therefore, the outcome of the American election will be pivotal in determining whether America intends to remain in the islands or distance itself from Europe. In my opinion, preserving the relationship between Europe and the United States is paramount. Failure to do so could embolden Russia to take further aggressive actions. First in Ukraine, but potentially in Moldova or in the Baltic countries. Although the Baltic countries belong to NATO, but if the islands becomes disorganized, the temptation for Russia to act may arise. Secondly, the West must enhance cooperation with the South, especially Africa. Preserving and developing relationship with this continent is essential. For Europe, this is important due to geographical proximity and migration concerns, but also because Russia and China are becoming more and more influent in Africa, and this action there fosters anti-French sentiment in the region. Thirdly, we must manage conflicts in crucial countries. Israel-Palestine conflict is of utmost importance. A solution is to create a state for the Palestinian people with the condition that this entity will not threaten the existence and the security of Israel. This two-state answer is problematic, we know that. But I cannot see any other issue to this war. We must persuade Israel to accept the creation of the Palestinian state, but with managers, leaders in Palestine. We must also push several Arabic countries to decide to do something for Palestinians. Moreover, we must tackle the situation in Lebanon because this state has nearly disappeared. The politician leadership is not possible, and the situation is explosive in Lebanon with Hezbollah. We must act also for this country a new order, because the next war could be in Lebanon. Finally, we must resolve the issue of Iran's nuclear program and its regional role. When I was president, we have concluded a nuclear agreement. It has been cancelled by President Trump, and now it's very difficult to obtain a new nuclear agreement. If Iran could reach the nuclear weapons, is sure that Israel attack Iran. Fourth, promoting democracy is fundamental. We cannot simply defend our own values as if they were simply local beliefs. We must continue to uphold democracy as the best system in the world, because the attacks of Russia and China are targeting our way of life indirectly. If we lose faith in our ability to protect and to strengthen these values, namely pluralism and freedom, we risk increasing tensions. This is even more true since we are witnessing today in our countries, in France in particular, a crisis of democracy, with a global surge of extremist parties, with citizens who don't participate to the election, and with frustration against governments. We have also the problem with social media, which create communities and provoke a risk of division in the democracy. France is not exempt for this overarching trend, needing a robust response which should overcome entrench traditional norms, indeed to end in France the excessive concentration of power in the hands of the executive at the expense of parliament, advocate for the establishment of a presidential system. France can imitate the United States. Don't repeat that in France. But your system is better for the parliament, for the Congress, for you, than the system, the political system in France. We must convince citizens that the institution can allow dialogue and participation in the decision. In France, there is now a distance which is created between the citizen and the power. We should not hesitate to be imaginative and iconoclastic to bring our citizens back to the conviction that our democracy is imperfect, but that it's our best system. The resilience of Western countries during and after the COVID crisis has clearly demonstrated this. It is a perfect example of the efficiency of democracy against authoritarian regimes. Fifth, concerning climate change, developed countries have the main important responsibility. We have to set the example and invest, as you do in Texas. We must invest massively in energy transition. Our actions and consumption patterns have contributed to the climate crisis, and we must now take decisions for correcting the damage. Europe and the United States must launch comprehensive solutions to cope climate change. If we want to avoid an international conflict, we must go further and deeper on environmental policies. Finally, I'm convinced that the European Union will play a key role in the global upheavals. Despite common misconception, it stands as a robust political and economic entity, significantly bolstering its stature and credibility in recent years, while not succumbing to separatist temptation in the wake of Brexit. I'm French, therefore I'm European. As President of the French Republic, I was in numerous sessions at the European Council when I participated actively in negotiation, and I can demonstrate the Union's resilience, the Union efficiency. It is often said about the European Union that at the end of the day, it's long. It almost takes the good decisions, but a bit too late. That's the problem in Europe. We decide, but too late. However, the history of the European Union is one of the most incredible achievements against all odds. Founded on fundamental rights, the European Union has historically wielded significant influence in economy and trade matters worldwide. Today, it competes for top position in exports and imports with the United States. That's a problem for some leaders in America and in China. Thus, its contribution is paramount in the new geopolitical landscape, particularly given its demonstrated capacity to fortify itself during adversity. Financial crisis, Greek crisis, COVID crisis, Europe has been in the good appointment. But now with the Ukrainian crisis, Europe is coping of what kind of defense we can organize. That's a new problem for Germany in particular. If the United States decide not to protect Europe, how European Union can manage this new stake? So the first priority for Europe now is our proper defense, our proper security. It's difficult for Germany because the policy in Germany during many years was not to prepare any conflict. not to have an army, not to have nuclear weapons. It was forbidden. So now for Germany is to invest more than before in defense expenses, but also to organize the new army with France, and also to cooperate with industrial companies to produce the same equipments. Hence, the European Union constitutes an important anchor point against trade, which is too often underestimated due to a lack of strong political representation. That's the problem for Europe. Who is president of Europe? Several fingers. So nobody. France has a significant part to play in this scenario. Now, particularly considering the war in Ukraine, the EU can no longer avoid the necessity, in one form or another, of implementing common defense measures commensurate with the threat. However, I emphasize that this reinforced and collective defense of Europe must occur with NATO. France, a long time, has been reluctant with NATO. Now I'm sure that the future is in NATO. But the question is, America will be ready to go further in NATO. We don't know. So the safeguard interest of Western countries is in NATO. To conclude, it's imperative to reinforce the relationship between European Union and the United States, particularly given the unfolding events in the Middle East. Collaborative efforts are essential to fight terrorism effectively, foster warmer diplomatic connections, and cultivate a more transparent and mutual beneficial trade partnership between our nations. This is even more true as we approach your upcoming presidential election in November. We must forge strong ties with all those who share our goals. We must invent a new way of working together without alignment or hierarchy, but with a crystal clear conception of a common interest. Turning our attention to China, it is imperative to have a common approach to effectively manage this complex relationship together. Consequently, Western nations must intensify cooperation amongst themselves while also nurturing relations with key allies such as Australia, Japan, South Korea, all of whom share concerns regarding Chinese action in the region. Accordingly, the challenge is to create negotiation spaces and build broad coalitions in order to demonstrate that humanity can address the issues and to give in this loony moment a little, very little hope for new generation. I'm sure that France will confirm its participation to this effort for peace and stability. And I hope we keep our democracy with strong lies and with great efforts. Thank you for your attention.
Just a reminder to everyone that now please use your hearing devices because the questions will be asked in English, but the responses will be in French. So I'll ask the first question of President Hollande. Thank you very much for that very insightful speech, and it's a great education for all of us. I would like to ask you about the question of terrorism. How can democracies best deal with the problem of terrorism without losing their own civil rights and the rights of their citizens? I know this is a question you've wrestled with for quite a long time, but I wondered if you could give us some insights on that.
Oui, la grande question dans une démocratie, c'est de savoir comment nous pouvons concilier les libertés fondamentales avec la lutte contre le terrorisme. Moi-même, donc, comme président, j'ai été conduit à suspendre un certain nombre de droits, ce qu'on appelle en France l'état d'urgence. Et donc, si nous prolongeons ce type de décision, nous pouvons changer l'état de notre société. Donc c'est de trouver l'équilibre entre la nécessaire protection, sécurité, prévention des actes terroristes et le maintien de nos libertés fondamentales. Pour parvenir à lutter contre le terrorisme, il y a deux sortes de terrorisme islamique. Il y a un terrorisme qui vient de l'extérieur, c'était Daesh, l'État islamique. Ça peut être d'autres organisations, et qui vient frapper. Je ne crois plus que ce terrorisme-là soit en état de mener des opérations comme ça a été le cas en France et en Europe et aux États-Unis. En revanche, il y a une deuxième forme de terrorisme beaucoup plus redoutable à empêcher, qui est des individus qui sont rapidement radicalisés et qui commettent des atrocités. En France, 2 professeurs ont été assassinés par des individus qui vivaient en France depuis quelquefois de nombreuses années, ou d'autres qui étaient venus plus récemment. C'est ce type d'individus qu'il est très difficile à identifier parce qu'ils peuvent être très rapidement radicalisés et conduits à commettre des actions. Et donc ils ne sont pas forcément fichés. Et quand bien même seraient-ils fichés, on ne peut pas les arrêter préventivement. Donc voilà, la grande question pour le terrorisme, et on va le vivre au moment des Jeux Olympiques, c'est que quelle liberté on va suspendre pendant les Jeux Olympiques, le moins possible. Et deuxièmement, quel est le risque principal? C'est celui d'un individu qui, avec un couteau, peut créer l'épouvante.
Thank you. All right. An advanced question from someone in the audience. French President Macron has recently announced what has been interpreted in the United States as a potential willingness to use French troops in the conflict with Russia in Ukraine. Can you tell us your thoughts, costs, and benefits of such a French military decision?
Même en français, j'ai du mal à pouvoir répondre. Peut-être qu'en anglais, ce serait plus simple, car les phrases que je pourrais prononcer ne seraient pas finalement mal comprises. Ou si elles étaient mal comprises, ce serait dû à mon anglais. Ce qu'a dit le président Macron était de montrer à Poutine que la France, comme certains pays européens, était décidée à aller le plus loin possible si il y avait une escalade. Je pense que c'était ça son propos. S'il y a une escalade du côté russe, l'Europe doit être à la hauteur de ce qui est finalement l'action éventuelle de la Russie. Mais la phrase a été sans doute mal comprise par l'opinion publique qui a craint que nous soyons engagés militairement en Ukraine. Je rappelle que l'Ukraine n'est pas membre de l'OTAN, de l'Alliance Atlantique, donc il n'y a aucune solidarité liée à l'intervention militaire. Il y a une solidarité en termes d'aide et de fourniture d'équipement. Mais nous ne sommes pas du tout obligés de participer à la guerre elle-même. La meilleure réponse a été donnée donc par le président ukrainien Zelensky qui a dit « Nous n'avons pas besoin de troupes venant de l'Europe ou des États-Unis. Nous avons besoin d'aide, d'armement, de munitions. » Et je sais que le Congrès américain en ce moment est en train d'en débattre, comme ça a été le cas aussi en Europe. si nous n'aidons pas l'Ukraine, l'Ukraine perdra la guerre. Si l'Ukraine perd la guerre, ce n'est pas simplement une désolation pour l'Ukraine, c'est un risque que la Russie aille encore un peu plus loin. C'est même un risque que la Chine aille un peu plus loin. C'est même un risque que la Turquie aille de son côté un peu plus loin. C'est-à-dire si le recours à la force est finalement payant, si rien n'est fait pour empêcher l'agresseur de reculer, alors l'ordre mondial sera un immense désordre puisque la force l'emportera sur le droit. C'est pour ça qu'il faut aider massivement l'Ukraine.
To change regions, you mentioned earlier the conflict in Africa, and we've recently heard discussions in this room about the problems in Sudan. And quite frankly, the situation in Africa does not get a lot of attention in the American press, but I think it should. Could you tell us a little bit more about why the United States should have more of a common interest with France in the situation in Africa? I think for many Americans, this seems like a very distant region.
Lorsque, comme président de la République, j'ai fait intervenir les forces françaises au Sahel, au Mali, puis après au Burkina Faso, au Niger, le président Obama, puisque c'était lui à ce moment-là le président des États-Unis, finalement était satisfait que ce soit la France qui fasse ce travail. Comme si c'était la responsabilité de la France de s'occuper de l'Afrique et pas celle des États-Unis. Je pense que c'est une erreur. Je ne suis pas sûr que la France soit toujours la mieux placée pour précisément mettre des moyens militaires au service de l'Afrique. Parce qu'elle est toujours, à ce moment-là, attaquée comme un pays qui essaye de retrouver son statut de puissance coloniale, ce qui n'est pas du tout notre intention. Et je ne pense pas que ce soit facile de convaincre l'opinion américaine qu'il va falloir aussi que vous vous occupiez de l'Afrique. Donc c'est à l'Europe de s'occuper de l'Afrique. Et la France doit prendre sa part. Mais ce qui est en train de se produire en Afrique, dans l'Afrique de l'Ouest, c'est l'entrée de la Russie, qui maintenant va mettre des forces militaires sur place. La Chine, qui s'est installée comme puissance économique majeure en Afrique, et avec un lien de dépendance maintenant des pays africains à l'égard du prêteur chinois. Et puis, dans l'Afrique de l'Est, c'est la désolation. Ce qui se passe au Soudan, c'est pas simplement dans la presse américaine qu'il n'y a pas véritablement de communication, c'est dans toute la presse internationale, européenne. Au Soudan, il y a des massacres. En République démocratique du Congo, le Rwanda, qui, c'est vrai, a été victime d'un génocide épouvantable, mais aujourd'hui, le président du Rwanda agit pour déstabiliser la République démocratique du Congo. Il y a des massacres. Et les Africains disent à ce moment-là, vous les Occidentaux, vous êtes tout à fait prêts à soutenir Israël quand Israël est attaqué par l'Iran, vous êtes tout à fait décidés à soutenir l'Ukraine, mais vous oubliez la situation dans laquelle nous sommes. Donc je pense que c'est très important politiquement de montrer que nous sommes aussi attentifs à régler ces conflits-là. La Russie déstabilise donc aussi l'Afrique de l'Est, mais pas simplement la Russie. La Turquie maintenant est de plus en plus intervenante en Afrique. Et faisons attention aussi que l'Afrique ne soit pas envahie par les groupes islamistes, parce que c'est aussi de cela dont il s'agit.
To switch the topic to an economic one, the Obama administration was involved in the negotiations toward a transatlantic trade and investment partnership, something that, from my perspective, we should have established in 1948 when the United States provided Marshall aid as perhaps an incentive for European integration, but we didn't join it. So this negotiations towards the TTIP began, and they are currently on hold. Could you say anything about the French interest, the French position in reviving these negotiations towards this free trade area that would unite the United States with Western Europe?
Notre intérêt commun est qu'il y ait un accord commercial entre les États-Unis et l'Europe. C'est l'intérêt des États-Unis pour avoir un commerce extérieur sans doute plus équilibré. C'est l'intérêt de l'Europe si elle veut préserver les excédents que nous faisons sur les États-Unis et continuer à avoir une croissance qui soit tirée par le commerce extérieur. Le TTIP a échoué parce que c'était la fin de la présidence Obama, c'était aussi en Europe, il y avait d'autres sujets de préoccupation. Les Allemands y étaient très favorables au TTIP, Merkel y était très favorable. La France, elle est toujours très réticente aux accords commerciaux. Parce que le poids de l'agriculture est important. Et donc, comme dans les accords commerciaux, il y a toujours une part pour l'agriculture. Et deuxièmement, parce qu'il y avait, du côté américain, la demande qu'il y ait une libéralisation des services, et notamment des services universels de culture, la culture. La France, nous pensons que nous sommes une exception. Que la culture ne peut pas être une marchandise. C'est une position que nous avons depuis longtemps, qui est un peu battue quand même en brèche, parce que maintenant les Google, Amazon et autres ont montré que ce n'était pas forcément facile de tenir sur cette ligne. Donc si nous voulons avoir un accord commercial, il faut essayer d'être très prudent sur la culture et sur l'agriculture. En plus, pour signer un accord commercial entre les États-Unis et l'Europe, il faut que tous les pays européens l'acceptent. Donc c'est long. Et comme la démocratie en Europe ne va pas bien, et en France elle ne va pas mieux, les groupes les plus radicaux sont contre les accords commerciaux. L'extrême droite, comme la gauche radicale, est contre les accords commerciaux. Donc il faut souhaiter que la démocratie aille mieux pour avoir des accords commerciaux. Ce n'est pas les accords commerciaux qui vont améliorer la démocratie, mais c'est la démocratie qui peut permettre de faire comprendre que nous avons tous intérêt à avoir des accords commerciaux et à éviter le retour du protectionnisme.
During your presentation, you spoke about trying to revive the nuclear agreement that had been negotiated with Iran. And of course, it was the United States that left that agreement. It was not Iran that left it. But my question is it realistic to think that this agreement can now be revived?
Non, aujourd'hui, lorsque l'Iran attaque Israël, faire comprendre à Israël que, bien sûr, l'Iran va renoncer à l'arme atomique est une illusion. Mais imaginons que nous trouvions une solution pour Gaza, pour la Palestine, et que l'Iran soit conduit à perdre, parce que l'Iran va perdre la guerre. Est-ce que le Hamas a accompli l'acte terroriste avec le soutien de l'Iran? Peut-être pas, mais l'Iran était forcément informé de ce qu'allait faire le Hamas. L'Iran va perdre la guerre parce que le Hezbollah a perdu partie de ses dirigeants, que le Hamas va être pour partie détruit, et que l'Iran a montré qu'il ne pouvait pas toucher le territoire israélien. Donc le rapport de force ne va pas être favorable à l'Iran dans la période prochaine. Et donc le régime des mollahs va se poser la question, qu'est-ce que nous faisons? Est-ce que nous continuons à harceler, mais avec le risque d'être à chaque fois battus, ou est-ce qu'on rentre de nouveau dans un processus de négociation? Donc dans plusieurs années peut-être, mais il faut qu'on empêche l'Iran de toute façon d'avoir l'arme atomique. Si l'Iran accédait au seuil nucléaire, c'est-à-dire la dernière étape, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, Israël frappera. Donc là, c'est une guerre d'une autre dimension. Donc on ne peut pas exclure l'idée qu'un jour, il faut revenir pour la négociation.
Thank you. A question about China. So, both United States and France have been concerned about China and its expansion simply beyond a regional power to become a global power. The U.S. thinking about China, I think, has evolved in the 1990s into the 21st century. I think U.S. governments tried an engagement strategy. We will let China join the WTO in hopes that this will perhaps democratize China or push them in that direction. And I think there's a belief now in the United States that that simply was not successful. And so we're going to follow more of a containment strategy. And this, I think, can be seen in the trade war that was started under President Trump and is going to be continued under President Obama. Could you share with us the French perspective on how to best deal with China and how that might be different than what you see as the American perspective?
Je voulais dire dans mon propos introductif, la Chine et la Russie sont dans une alliance qui, pour le moment, ne s'est à aucun moment distendue. Mais leurs moyens sont différents. Ils ont la même détestation de ce que nous sommes. Vous ne pouvez pas imaginer combien Poutine déteste ce que nous représentons. Poutine pense que nous sommes des sociétés décadentes, faibles, incapables de nous défendre dans une période longue. Pour les Chinois, c'est une autre forme de mépris, mais c'est une forme même maintenant devenue d'arrogance. Les Chinois, le régime chinois pense qu'il peut être demain la puissance première. Mais c'est en sens que les vulnérabilités sont différentes entre la Russie et la Chine. La Russie peut être battue militairement si on aide l'Ukraine ou si on montre notre force. Mais les sanctions économiques contre la Russie sont de faible portée. Pourquoi ? Parce que l'économie russe est très modeste. Donc, c'est pas sur les questions économiques que Poutine peut être mis en difficulté dans son propre pays. C'est sur les pertes militaires qu'il peut éventuellement subir, qu'il peut se trouver critiqué. La Chine, elle est très vulnérable économiquement. Donc si l'Europe et les États-Unis, face à une tentation de la Chine d'être plus agressive, si nous agissons ensemble, si nous menaçons la Chine de sanctions, si nous prenons même des sanctions, imaginons si la Chine allait plus loin sur Taïwan, alors c'est la vulnérabilité même du régime chinois qui serait en cause. Xi Jinping est beaucoup plus fragile qu'on ne l'imagine. On pense toujours que les dictatures, elles sont éternelles. L'expérience du siècle précédent prouve le contraire. Tout à l'heure, on était dans la librairie Bush, on voyait les images de l'effondrement de l'Union soviétique. Donc les dictatures ne sont pas aussi solides qu'elles le prétendent. Et donc la Chine, elle a besoin du commerce, elle a besoin de l'investissement, elle a besoin de l'échange de technologies. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle il faut que l'Europe et les États-Unis agissent ensemble par rapport à la Chine. C'est pas si simple parce que même en Europe, en ce moment, il y a un voyage que fait le chancelier allemand Scholz en Chine. Les Allemands n'ont pas la même position que les Français par rapport à la Chine. Mais pour Xi Jinping, l'Europe, ça n'existe pas. Pour Xi Jinping, il y a l'Allemagne, la France, l'Italie, le Royaume-Uni. Or, les Chinois savent très bien utiliser chacune de nos faiblesses. Avec les Allemands, Xi Jinping va pouvoir parler commerce. Et Scholz rentrait, le chancelier d'Allemagne, rentrait à Berlin en disant on a sauvé les investissements pour et les ventes d'automobiles. Xi Jinping va venir à Paris dans quelques jours pour l'anniversaire du rétablissement des relations diplomatiques entre la France et la Chine, la reconnaissance de la République populaire de Chine. Et donc la France est toujours flattée à ce moment-là. Et les Français, ils aiment être flattés. Ils adorent être flattés. Et donc quand le président chinois dit le général de Gaulle avait permis le rétablissement, vous êtes le pays préféré, nous ne devons pas être dupes. Nous savons bien qu'il y a, et c'est très habile de la part de la Chine, une volonté d'utiliser toutes les failles de notre coopération, de notre stratégie. Bon, donc il faut agir ensemble. C'est comme ça qu'on... je ne pense pas que la Chine veuille rentrer dans un processus d'agression. La Chine, elle veut continuer à bénéficier du commerce. Les Américains, c'était Bill Clinton qui était président, mais les Allemands pensent la même chose, ou pensaient la même chose. Vous pensez toujours que parce qu'il y a du commerce, il va y avoir de la démocratie. Parce qu'il y a de l'intérêt économique, il va y avoir de la liberté. Ben non. Il peut y avoir un pays capitaliste qui ne respecte pas la démocratie. Poutine, il pouvait gagner beaucoup d'argent, il en a beaucoup, grâce au gaz. À un moment, il préfère ne plus vendre de gaz, mais prendre une partie de l'Ukraine. Donc le nationalisme, il est plus fort que simplement l'intérêt financier ou l'intérêt commercial. C'est ça qu'il faut bien comprendre. La démocratie, c'est pas simplement parce que l'économie va bien, que le pouvoir d'achat, la consommation se développe. La démocratie, c'est une conception de la société. Donc voilà, il faut se mettre sur l'exigence démocratique.
I realize as I look at my watch that really needed to be the last question. So we have one more small event here.
Thank you so much, President Hollande, for joining us. Thank you for sharing your insight, your experience, your perspective. Thank you, Dr. Golson. Thank you, Dr. Burse. I want to now invite President Hollande and Dr. Golson to come forward for the award presentation. Tonight, Dr. Golson is receiving a promotion to the rank of officer in the Order of Academic Palms, into which he was inducted as a knight over a dozen years ago. This is a prestigious national order bestowed by the French Republic. It recognizes distinguished scholars, educators, and individuals who have made valuable contributions to universities, education, and the dissemination of French culture. Today, it stands as one of the oldest civil honors granted by the French Republic.
First, I apologize for my English. I don't know if you have understood the whole speech. And I apologize for my French because I don't know if the translation was correct. So perhaps you have not understood any word I've pronounced in this conference. But thank you for your indulgence. And now I will try to tell to the professor what we think about him from a French view. Because in France, we are fond of awards. We like medals. Not as in Soviet Union, not to put the jacket, but we like the ceremony to put on the jacket one thing. Napoleon was a great leader, but he lost the war. In French, we like the loser, in fact. So Napoleon has created medals. It was not the democracy, but with the democracy, we keep the medals. We lock out the dictators, but we keep the medals. So it is a great pleasure and honor to confer the distinction of Officier of the Academic Palms upon Professor Richard Golsan. Academic Palms is the best award for a teacher. My grandfather was a teacher, and when I was young, he showed me this medal. His goal, before I was President of the Republic, but he wanted I was a teacher. So you have obtained what my grandfather owed for me. The history of the academic palms that's back to 1808, when Napoleon Bonaparte established the decoration to distinguish individuals who have made significant contributions to the field of education and culture. And today, it remains one of the highest honors bestowed by the French government upon educators and scholars around the world. Professor Golsan's remarkable achievements to the fields of French literature, European studies, and historical justice make him a truly deserving recipient of this prestigious decoration. You are professor at Texas A&M University, and you have enriched our understanding of modern and contemporary France and Europe. His extensive research on modern genocides. I've spoken at this moment of genocide in Rwanda. As you know, you work about that. It's a complex problem in France. And you have also worked on historical trials, and you have examined and search on darkest chapters of human history. Professor Golsan's leadership as the director here on the France Texas A&M University Institute, and you play as editor-in-chief of South Central Review, and demonstrate your commitment to fostering academic excellence and international collaboration. You have written a dozen books and more than 100 publications on your name. Because in France we have many publications, but not written by the author, especially for politicians. Perhaps presidents, it's possible. So it's very important to, from my point of view, to celebrate what you have done for the history of the humanity. In recognition of this exemplary scholarship dedicated to education and profound impact of the academic community, it's my privilege, it's the reason of my visit here, to present Professor Richard Golsan with the distinction of officier. So in France, we have chevalier and officier. After, donc officier of the academic palms, may this honor inspire future generations of scholars to search excellence. And congratulations, Professor Golsan, and thank you for invaluable contribution to the pursuit of knowledge and understanding. Au nom du ministre de l'Éducation nationale, nous faisons officier dans l'ordre des palmes académiques.
Thank you, President Hollande. I've never been honored like this in my life, and it's a delight to be honored like this in front of so many friends, students, and colleagues. And so with that, I think we'll call the end of the evening. Thank you all for coming. I really want to tell you how much I know I have learned from tonight, and I know that our community has been enriched by your presence and your knowledge. So please join me in one last round of applause for President Francois.